It's time for the View in Your Mirror podcast. I'm Katie Harms, and along with Lisa Rubin, we help you check in and curate the best possible you and the best view in your mirror. We share tips, tricks, and strategies from our 35 plus years in our respective industries. We talk about your day from morning to night and everything in between. We share our uniqueness, relish in our shared experiences. Along the way, we share conversation with fabulous people who give us their own thought-provoking insights. So come along as we help you hone the best view in your mirror.
Lisa.
Katie. I'm getting over a cold, so I might sound a little sexy today.
Oh, a little sexy. Okay. I want to go fast. I want like the shortest intro ever so we can devote all the time to the guest.
Okay.
Well, maybe not the shortest intro, but
Katie, I'd like to have you do a short intro.
Not even possible.
It's not possible. I have my notes. I think I know what we're going to talk about, but it's always a surprise when you get on.
When we do our background, our research, we have Jamie Yuccas as our guest. Let's just start out with that. And she's a Minnesota girl. And she is living a big life in LA/Australia. For those who don't know who Jamie is, you're living under a rock. First of all, she is a multi-Emmy award-winning CBS News correspondent. She's known for high-profile stories, including the Beijing Olympics in 2022, social justice protests following the murder of George Floyd. We know her from WCCO and as a reporter and a contributor to the evening news and CBS This Morning, which she did when she was on staff at WCCO for all really tied to breaking stories in the Midwest. She really built herself a name and had opportunities that helped catapult her to where she is. But she's done the work. She is the co-anchor on KCLA News Mornings, and she does a show called, or a segment called Java with Jamie, helping people tell their stories, which is so exciting to us because that's what we love to do. So you can tell I'm a little excited to have Jamie.
You're a little excited, Katie. You're very excited.
Well, and what I love is just the confluence of how things come to us. We were talking about this a little bit, right? Our growth and the people that we've been able to bring on who have just continued to say yes to us. Have we had anyone say no?
I can't think of one person that has said no.
I can't think of that. And hopefully we haven't just jinxed ourselves, but
yeah, exactly.
Really, people have been so kind and giving and caring about what we're doing. And I hope it's because this is very heart-centered for both of us.
It's a passion project, but I tell people I have a podcast, is that when I have a guest on, I'm learning with them. I'm learning with our listeners. And each time I have a guest on this podcast, it makes me a better version of myself, or it makes me think about something I never thought about. And I was just actually talking to somebody yesterday who I'm trying to get on our podcast. And I said to them, you have to listen to this particular podcast guest. I've listened to it 3 times. And she goes, really? And I said, yeah. So this will be the first one. And I'm not going to say it out loud. I'm not going to do a shout out right now. But I will tell you that all of our guests have been fantastic. It's just which guest hits you in a way that you maybe will need to hear their voice again.
Oh my gosh. I just got a thought in my head and I don't even know if I should say it. But
no, not that one, Katie.
Not that one? How do you know?
I haven't listened to that one 3 times. I just have to listen to you.
No, it wasn't that one. No. I had a thought in my head about an analogy to our podcast. And we're not reverent by any stretch of the imagination, but you said something very interesting. And I think really, depending on if somebody is just wanting to learn who we are and they go in and they pick a podcast, whatever podcast, hopefully it'll be they pick something that the universe says they need to listen to at that time, which reminds me of occasionally when you go to church or synagogue or you go see a speaker and they say something that you're like, wow, I was supposed to hear that today.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, I thought you were going to somewhere way different. Exactly.
So that's what I feel like our podcast is. And what's interesting as we're coming up on the holidays, and I feel like everybody that I talk to has shifts going on. Shift, SHIFT, shifts going on in their lives. So I feel like we're all, and maybe it's the age, but I have a multi-generational group of friends. So maybe it's what's going on in the universe, that there are shifts happening. I would like to hope that the shifts are to a kinder, gentler treatment of each other in the world that we live in. But whatever the shift is, I think people are becoming aware of shifts in their lives. And, you talk about trying to get a person to come on the podcast. And we met a person at an event that Katie Sievert was having, a woman by the name of Julie Okel. And she is founder of The Shift Matters. And that's a possibility partner to Gen Xers shaping their what's next, which is a lot of words. But what she does is she coaches people. She's a resiliency advocate and she's an adult learning expert, which is kind of exciting when you think there's people out there helping you figure out what your shift is, because your shift matters. So I'm excited to have her on coming up, because that is a theme that kind of keeps coming up and helping people tell their stories and having engaging, interesting guests. And every time we do a podcast, I get more excited for the future.
Good. Me too, Katie. And you know what? Being that this podcast is being recorded during the holiday season, I want to also give a shout out to everybody who listens to us on a regular basis. I want to wish them very, very happy holiday, however you are going to celebrate your holidays, whether it be Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, whatever it is. And I hope that 2025 can bring you a new shift.
A new shift, that you go into 2025 just hopeful.
I think that's going to be our word, Katie. Remember, we usually get a word for the next year.
Did we pick one together?
Well, last year, I think we negotiated.
Well, you have a better, my word is probably forgetful.
I think last year our word was either gratitude or joy. I'd have to go back and listen.
Okay.
But I feel like those were the two words. But this year, I think it should be shifting.
I like that word. Resiliency. It's another word.
That could be another word. What maybe everybody will wait to hear in 2025 when we drop our first podcast for the new year, and we'll really let you know what we've decided. We got to think about it. So we're thinking out loud right now on our podcast.
Yeah, we're spitballing it. Are you thinking then do we each still have our own word and a collective word, or are we going to embrace this and jump into 2025 together with the same word?
I think we should do the same word if we can agree on it.
I think it'll be easier than you think to agree on it, because we're down to 2 words, basically.
Yeah. I think people are going to have to wait and see what we decide. How's that?
All right. Well, we'll hold off. In the meantime, I wonder if Jamie Yuccas picks a word. We'll have to ask that question.
We will.
Let's say hello to Jamie. Jamie, I don't know. You got to tell us how you go from starting your own newspaper and your in-house radio station and a grandfather who paid you $2 a week if you could pass his current event quiz to co-hosting a morning news station in LA.
Yeah, it's been quite
a big jump.
It is. But what's funny is bringing that up. I do think back, I've always just had a passion, right? So when I was a little kid, what you're describing, I would go up to my cabin and I started a little newspaper called the Loon Lagoon, which I'm assuming Minnesotans will appreciate. That's the state bird. But
Leech Lake, right? Leech Lake.
Leech Lake near Walker, Minnesota. If anyone knows Longville. My grandfather and my great uncle, my great aunt, my other great uncle, they all lived in houses around a lagoon that connected to Leech Lake. So that's how I came up with the lagoon part. And my grandfather is the one who he really wanted my brother and I to be up on current events. He thought it was really important for us to understand what was happening in the world. He would talk about the Middle East. He would talk about politics. And so when we were old enough, he would have us both read the newspaper. And if we were able to pass this current events quiz, we got $2 a week. So the inspiration for my little newspaper came from doing that. I ended up falling in love with being just knowledgeable about what was going on in the world. I loved talking to adults as a kid and, was somebody that just really appreciated knowing things. I was a very curious child. So I really wanted to know more about everything. So that's how that kind of got started. And then I remember my parents, originally my grandfather on my mother's side. So my grandfather on my father's side is the one who got me interested in current events. My grandfather on my mother's side got me into music. And so he and I would play the trumpet together. And eventually he got me a keyboard because we didn't have a house that could fit a piano at the time. And so I would start doing little recordings where I then decided I'd do a little radio show. I'd do like a little keyboard and then I'd talk and I'd try to DJ and put my own stuff in there. And I had fun with that. So it's kind of a mixture of all my worlds. At the time, I don't think I saw that they were related. Now I do.
You were just having fun.
I was just being a kid, like just exploring what interested me, right? So that's how that all came about. But, there's been a lot of steps in between that. In high school, I always credit Terry Caruso was my high school English teacher at Maple Grove Senior High. She wanted to start a newspaper. The school was only a year old at the time. So we started the Harbinger. And because of that and being able to write articles and some op-eds and that type of thing, when I went to the University of Minnesota, they hired me at the Minnesota Daily, which it's very unusual for a freshman to get hired as a staff writer at the Daily. But because of what we had done at the high school, they hired me. Surprising.
You had the body of work. You had the body of work that you could produce. Most freshmen do not have that coming in.
Correct. And Terry Caruso, she was hard. She was really hard. And I appreciated that about her. She'd be very direct with you of what was right and what was wrong. So from there, I was all in. I was going to be a newspaper reporter. I wanted to travel the world. My father had grown up in Chicago and he loved this columnist, Mike Royko. So I thought, well, maybe one day I'll be a columnist, like Mike Royko. And I was all in on newspapers. And then Ken Stone was my professor at the University of Minnesota. And he came to me and he said, I'm sorry, but you have to take a TV internship. Newspapers are going to die. We're going to go digital. You should take a television internship to understand how TV works. And how, and because even if you go write for a newspaper, eventually they're going to end up in the digital space anyway. So you should learn what the visual medium is about. And I like kicking and screaming applied. And by the time I went to apply for an internship, the only one that was left was a weather internship at WCCO.
Which explains your constant attraction of weather events.
Maybe. I always was fascinated in weather, but I always knew I was much better at writing and I was much more interested in reading than I was at math and science. I hate saying that as a woman because we've done so much in terms of getting girls into STEM. And I'm very impressed with women who have gone into those fields. It just wasn't my thing, really. So, but what I did enjoy, first of all, the first day of my internship, it ended up being 9/11. So everybody got
the first day of your internship was 9/11.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Classes canceled at the University of Minnesota. The guy that had approved my internship called me, I don't know if you should come in. Do you want to come in? So we settled on having me come in, I think for a couple hours or something. And then I would start the next day, but it was such a chaotic, just watching how that all unfolded and the debates that happened in the newsroom and seeing pictures to video that did drive me into being interested in then television. not necessarily weather in television, but in how stories unfolded in television. So the weather internship, though, did give me a real window because the weather department at that point in time had a glass wall, and the producers sat with their backs to the wall, and you could see into the anchor team. So it was Don Shelby and Amelia Santinello, and I could see into the desk, and I would interact with them. And eventually, having that relationship, my internship was ending, allowed me to then apply for an associate producer position, which the anchors vouched for me and said, I think she'd be great. So I was able to get that position, which I then worked overnights. If you guys remember Cindy Hilger.
You were still in school.
I was still in school, and I was taking extra credits because I just wanted to get done. At that point, it was like, I know this is what I'm going to do. I know this is the field I'm supposed to go into. So I just want to get done with school. I'm over this, and I'm already working at the TV station. So let's get this started. So I graduated college in 3 years while working overnights and waitressing.
Wow.
So you're an underachiever is what you're saying.
Yes, yes. I like to really set my expectations low is what.
And, as you were telling this, I was thinking to myself, your first day of an internship was like being in the ER of news anchoring.
Absolutely.
It was like you got to see what happens when something really happens.
Well, exactly. And I think that is what, when you have that as a foundation, because remember, I wasn't interested. I thought it was just like pretty people got up on an anchor desk and talked for a living. And I didn't understand, how specific you have to write to video, or the editorial that ends up happening of, we can no longer show the plane going into the building, because that's going to desensitize people. And, how long are we going to show these images? Should we show the bloodied people? There were just tons of conversations. I remember going, this is really fascinating that there's this much that's taken into account, because you do have both words and pictures that you're having to kind of marry to one another. Right. So yeah, I think, in some ways that probably just reaffirmed that I wanted to be a journalist, but then really did kind of, propel me into that space instead of going back to newspapers, which Ken Stone and I are still friends to this day. And he's always like, I told you so.
And you were an intern with
Paul Douglas, who was also, Belinda Jensen was also his intern. So he would tease me all the time that I was never going to be, more famous than Belinda. I'd like to think Belinda and I are like, the highest of achievers in our own right. She's like the queen of weather and local news. And I've been able to, go on and do things for the national broadcasts, and now, anchoring the show in Los Angeles, keeping my toe over at the network a little bit, but, kind of creating my own path too. Because the position I'm in now, it's never really been done before. It's a hybrid position. So I anchor the local KCAL morning show from 7 to 10 a.m. And then I turn around and I go into sometimes doing pieces for them, sometimes doing morning or evening news pieces for CBS. So I still have my hands in a lot of pots. And I think that still goes back to even that weather internship where I was trying to get into the newsroom and, still have my hands there and that kind of thing, just finding my own kind of path and way within a newsroom.
Well,
okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I was thinking to myself, you were working through COVID.
Yeah.
Were you doing it in your house or?
No. So I'm initially, everybody in the world thought this was going to last 2 weeks, right? We're all going to go back to our lives. So initially, yes, I did some pieces, and it would be like this, right? Like I'd have a producer from New York on Zoom with me, and we'd interview someone, and then we'd cut the piece together. But when George Floyd happened, the network, CBS, had always brought me back to Minnesota to cover stories, because I do have a lot of connections in Minneapolis, having been a news anchor, having grown up there, having gone to college there. And so it was one of those things. They called and they said, you can say no, but this is one of those events we have to travel people in. We wanted to ask you if you wanted to go back. And I said yes. And I ended up, traveling in for that. And then once I did that, it was like, well, okay, if you're willing to travel, can we now have you go here? And can we now have you go here? And can you go there? And can you do this? Which was like good and bad, and kind of why I'm now in the role that I'm in, because it was good in the aspect that I was still getting out and being able to tell stories. But there were a number of things about COVID that really ended up psychologically really not being great. I mean, for everyone, I understand, but it's like multi-layered, I feel like, with me. So one of the events that they sent me to was the Super Bowl in Florida, where, Florida had very different restrictions than where I live in California. And I went in, and it was vaccinated healthcare workers who could go in to the game. After the game ended, I was standing outside interviewing some other healthcare workers, and a group of very drunk healthcare workers came out, and one of them touched me inappropriately, which was awful. And it was one of those things that, in terms of personal space during COVID, it was like, just as I said, multi-layered, not a great situation. Then I covered the Beijing Olympics. I covered both the Tokyo Olympics and Beijing Olympics. The Tokyo Olympics, Simone Biles had a mental health crisis. I feel like those of us covering it was very hard. But I didn't know that Beijing would be even harder, because Beijing, we basically were locked down, and we were in our hotel room, tested every morning, and then if we were negative for COVID, we could go into the media areas. But every day, psychologically, just waiting for your test, we would see people in Beijing like taken out of the hotel and put into an ambulance and taken away, have no idea where they're going in terms of being isolated. And then I covered the Maricopa County election for the presidential election in 2020, where, if you guys recall, I think we've forgotten because this election cycle was such a crazy one. But in Maricopa County in 2020, all of the journalists were kind of like in a pen almost outside the election headquarters. And I remember my mom calling me being like, "Oh my gosh, like, why are you there?" Like, because it's an open carry state. So around the perimeter of this fence were all people with their guns, which is perfectly legal for them to do in the state of Arizona. But my mom, then had a lot of anxiety and panic. And it was a ripple effect within my family. My brother was really upset that I was going back out into the world. He and his wife had really locked themselves down. They didn't understand why I was continuing to put myself in these situations. My mother was scared from a physical safety perspective. I just got burned out, because even going to anchor CBS Mornings in New York, which is something that I always loved doing, you had a test every other day. And you would wait and up at night on your phone and wait for the test results. And all you could think of is, if it comes back positive, I'm stuck in this hotel room in New York City that's about 300 square feet for the next 14 days. So I really did get burned out during COVID with all the travel and the testing and the quarantining. And funny enough, I never tested positive through that entire time. Amazingly,
Wow.
I tested positive a year after the Omicron variant. So I didn't even test positive during Omicron. It was a year after that. So, I do go back, like, I wash my hands a lot. I use, hand sanitizer. I always wore a mask flying. Seems like that worked because I never got sick. But yeah, so that's when I went to my bosses and my contract was coming up. It was, well, what are you looking to do? How can we move you forward? And I said, I got to be honest, I'm burned out. I don't know that I can keep doing this network thing anymore. And Wendy McMahon, who's now in charge of CBS News, at the time was in charge of local stations. And she came to me and said, "Would it be better for you to be home more?" And I said, "Well, that's a big part of it." And so she knew that they were creating more shows at KCAL. And that's how I started doing my morning show. She didn't want to take away the network piece of it. So that's how I still get to do pieces for the network and sometimes still appear on CBS. And people have asked me, because I covered the Olympics for CBS News in Paris this last summer. And I was off my show for 3 weeks here in LA to do that. And people wondered how that came about. And I actually had it written into my contract because Tokyo and Beijing had been so bad. I said,
Yeah.
"I really deserve Paris. Please, please, can I beg of you?" And they said yes. So that's how that came about. And I'm really glad I had that experience to kind of fully move forward out of the cloud of COVID, if you will, and that really, Paris felt like we were getting back to life. It was a beautiful Olympics, beautiful, the athletes were great. It was fun storytelling. So I just am really appreciative that they've let me do that.
And you could tell that when you would watch it and watch you and some of the other people, everyone was smiling.
Yeah.
And they didn't seem stressed out. And they actually, I felt like they asked better questions.
Yeah.
And they got people to be more vulnerable in their interviews.
Yeah, and I think that could be because so many of us did cover 2021 with the summer athletes, and many of them did return in 2024. I say 2021, they called it the 2020 Olympics, but it got moved a year. So there was only 3 years now between these last two.
Right.
I think a lot of us remember what people were going through and not being able to do in-person interviews. And this did, I think the athletes had more fun, yeah, all around. I think you're absolutely right. It was so much better.
Okay. I have a little question regarding what I do for a living, right? Wardrobe consultant. But when you're going to the Olympics, do you bring your personal clothes? Do you have a wardrobe person who actually lays out the clothes for you? I know you have hair and makeup, but what happens with the clothes and the jewelry and stuff? Is that on you for these Olympics?
Well, so I have makeup. We do not have hair people. So
really? Okay.
I am very lucky that my makeup person helps me tame my hair, because a lot of times in the back, it's like all flipped up. And so she usually like combs me and sprays it down for me. So I'm very appreciative of that. But yeah, we have makeup. We don't have hair. We have an image consultant who comes in every so often, and not all of us meet with her every time she's there. She's wonderful. But it's one of those things. I met with her probably a couple months before I went to the Olympics, and I had not met with her since 2020. And I did 2020 over Zoom. So, which is, that was a weird world to be pulling clothes out of my closet to show her, because you can't really tell with the fabric and the lighting and all that stuff. But it's one of those things that I never consider my on-air clothes my personal clothes. Because when you're reporting in Paris or anywhere, whether it's a natural disaster, it's a Super Bowl, it's Paris, whatever it is, you're probably going to trash it in some way because you're wearing it for so many hours and live shots and over time. And if you're traveling, you're trying to conserve your suitcase space and that type of thing. So you might have to repeat, things before they get laundered and that kind of stuff. So I usually, when it's those types of assignments, I try to stick to some of the rules that the image consultant lays out, but they're not high end, usually clothes and shoes. They're like and I love this brand. There's nothing against it at all, but it's more like an Ann Taylor, J. Crew, Banana Republic, maybe a solid color top, pants, so that you can just it's kind of more utility, just
right.
Maybe get down the jewelry. Now in studio, it's very different. I have a lot of, nicer clothes and clothes that I expect to have for years, blazers and, more tailored pants and tops and that kind of thing, and just richer fabrics. So you have to the way you think about clothes is a little odd, I think, when you're in this job, because it's like, here's my studio clothes, here's my packing and going clothes, here's my, this is my personal life, Jamie clothes.
But that's really good that you're thinking of it like that. There isn't a lot of, I help women like you, I have for many years, and they don't think of it like that. So you're way ahead of most.
Well, and I will tell you that it's not always easy to think that way, because there's certain things in my personal life, there's certain patterns or colors or things that I love to wear, out and to dinner or on a date with my husband. But, when I wear it in studio, everyone's like, what the hell? So life could be easier that way in some ways, if you didn't think about it. But I just have gotten to the point where it is almost now, because I've been trained for more than 20 years to do it this way, to think like that.
Well,
That's great.
Do you ever use anything like Rent the Runway? We had Amelia on, and she said she and others will go that direction.
I will say I have used it. I kind of go in and out of it a little bit. My co-anchor loves it. She uses it a lot. I find I have a harder time with sizing, I think, because I'm a little bit taller and I've got broader shoulders and I've got hip, so it's, I was finding for a while I would do it and I was sending a lot of it back because it just wasn't right fit or cut. Because that's the other thing I've learned, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but our consultant is really big on, you can buy something that's maybe a little bit cheaper and get it tailored, and then it's going to look great, so.
Oh, I'm all about that. I'm all about getting alterations. Like, things don't fit everyone the same.
No.
And you can have something altered. Absolutely. 100%. And
Yeah.
there's also other tricks that you can do for that kind of thing, and how you can repeat your clothes and no one knows.
That's what I've been trying. That's my latest iteration from the image consultant this last time, is some really higher end blazers, some nice silk camis, and just how we can interchange them with different pants or, jackets and different things like that. So I'm working on it.
In the weird world that you're living in, my guess is that people are going to comment. If they see a repetitive something or too many times, social media is right at their fingertips. They're telling you all sorts of things.
I also think that women who are watching you, if they like how it looks on you, they're going to think about it for themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that you're a role model. That's what I tell the people I help. Think of yourself as a role model to other women, especially younger women that might want to be doing what you're doing and being out in the world. That's more of what I tell people to think about too.
I think that's a really good way, I think, to think about it. At least that's very smart. I think the social media thing to me is like, we could spend 3 podcasts on social media and commenting. I have gotten to the point in my life, I don't care. Like, if you're going to comment and email me because you noticed I repeated an outfit, it's like, wow, I wish I had your life and nothing better to do.
That kind of time.
The only stickler I am is you got to worry about the bra, Jamie. That's my main deal. The
undergarments are a big thing.
Undergarments and having the right bra and the right fit. Your clothes are going to look great. If you have the wrong bra, the wrong fit, the wrong Spanx, the wrong underwear, doesn't matter what you have on.
Well, and if you haven't adjusted your bra straps,
I'm all over that one.
Yeah. Check on the bra discussion with Jamie. Very good, Lisa. We got that in.
Well, what's funny though is that I remember I was filling in on CBS Morning in New York, and I had brought on all these outfits that I absolutely loved, and I knew that the consultant had really, we had picked some of them out together, and so I was feeling confident and good. And I walked out, and there's a guy in New York who's in charge of like making sure things are steamed and, little, if there's a tear, sew it up, kind of thing, wardrobe. And he came up to me and he brought me, I remember, some Spanx and handed them to me and said, these outfits will look even better if you wear these, because honey, you're not 19 anymore. And I went, oh.
And it was probably because you had the wrong underwear on. It wasn't because of how your body looked.
No.
Because that's what Spanx do. They smooth everything out. So.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We have all sorts of more questions, and some might involve underwear. I don't know. You never know on this podcast, but we'll be right back.
You are invited to make your way to a beautifully inventive and delightful store in the Galleria called Sweet Ivy. Becky Leffler's inspiration for the store comes from her vacations in Marco Island, where she relished in the sensory delights, intoxicating aromas, vivid colors, and exquisite products in the local gift shops. She has gone on to curate a beautiful selection of apparel, shoes, accessories, and gifts born of her love for unique products and her unwavering belief in her vision, brought to life and cared for by a fabulous staff. Feminine, chic, pieces that will elevate and stay in your wardrobe for years to come. Brands like Tyler Bow from Rhode Island, Spartina 449, and Magic Pants by Lise. Not to be forgotten is Littles by Sweet Ivy, their predominantly children's store and home to Barefoot Dreams, which you need to experience. Give yourself the gift of this store in the Galleria. Shop Sweet Ivy. ShopSweetIvy.com.
We're with Jamie Yuccas, and this is Beyond Delightful. I am not surprised because you have not fundamentally changed who you are from the time you let us all come along with you and you educated us and from when you were here in Minnesota. But truly, you are an open book and you really have a great sense of yourself. And where does that come from? Has that always been there?
So the funny thing to me is that when I look back, when I was talking about being a kid and understanding that I had this passion, I wanted to go, I think I have always had an idea of who I am. But then, of course, like society starts telling you things and you enter relationships and you start realizing not everybody's family's the same when you become an adult and you enter the real world. So I always laugh that I think I really did know who I was very early. And then I kind of lost myself. And then you enter this world of media where social media is coming up. I remember in 2007, actually back to your bra conversation. I was working in Fort Myers, Florida, and I had worn this cami and jacket and I thought I looked great. And I walked out on set and I remember this woman emailed in and she told me I was too sexy because she could see my cleavage. And I forwarded it to my mom joking and said, "Oh my gosh, someone thinks I have cleavage." So I've always had a sense of humor. I've always kind of I try to laugh these things off along the way. I use humor as deflection. But, when I left Minneapolis, I got to New York and I had been married. And when I got to New York, my marriage fell apart for a number of reasons. It wasn't just my job. Everyone, oh, you got to New York, and it wasn't just my job. I think, people grow in different directions. I have nothing ill to say about my ex-husband, but we just became very, very different in our goals and what we wanted. And that happened, but it was also pretty fundamentally shook me. I then focused so much on my career, which actually was probably unhealthy in a lot of ways. I remember covering the Pulse nightclub shooting and being devastated about my relationship status, and then having to go into work where I'm talking to these people who have lost their loved ones in a nightclub. And it was just, I was all over the place. And I came back to New York after that. And I had a couple other assignments that ended up being very mentally draining. And I had a girlfriend in New York who I was in a running club with. And she said, "I think you should talk to someone. I think you should talk to a therapist." I was like, "Oh, no. I grew up in Minnesota. We don't do that kind of thing. I can just get over it. It's not, feelings. I don't have feelings, And she was like, "No, I think it might be something you want to explore." And I kind of brushed it off. And then I started dating this guy that was very toxic. I then had my stepfather, my aunt, and my grandmother all pass away within 90 days. And my mom had been living in Arizona and working a job randomly in Portland, Oregon, traveling back and forth on the West Coast. And I was all the way in New York. And all this happened. It was my mom's husband, her sister, and her mother. And I was devastated for her. I had taken all this bereavement in a very short period of time. I was still throwing myself into work. I had this personal loss in terms of my marriage. I was now in this toxic relationship that I didn't know how to really get out of and navigate. And Ben Tracy, who is a WCCO alum, called me out of the blue and said, "I'm leaving for Beijing, China. You should take my job in LA." And I had been to Los Angeles one time, didn't know if I liked it, but I went downstairs to our talent development office and said, "I need to be in Los Angeles. I need to be closer to my mom. And I just need to go." And they went, "Oh, this could work out great." I thought I'd be out here like 2 years. It's turned into shy of a decade. And once I got out here, this is the land of therapy and hippy dippy, finding yourself and going to sound baths and, having spiritual awakening. So I had a boss that was like, "Look, you've had all this death, like at least go talk about grief, and understand what that is." So I started with a therapist and I told people she was okay. She wasn't great, but it led me to another therapist because of this toxic relationship that I got out of. And she is wonderful. I still see her when I feel like I need a checkup, but I had been seeing Cynthia for, I don't know, 6 years or so. And we just dove into everything. And I now tell young journalists starting out that my number one piece of advice is to get a therapist or counselor or someone they can talk to and learn how to compartmentalize on the job and then feel their feelings when they have the chance to. And also self-care. I think a lot of women, I'm sure you guys talk about it on this podcast a lot, don't take care of themselves. And if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. And I think part of taking care of yourself is learning and understanding who you are and, what you care about and how you want to show up in life. So my husband's also a big believer in therapy. He was divorced. He had seen a therapist when we got together and started dating. And then he asked me to move in with him. He has a son. And I said, well, you're divorced. I'm divorced. Clearly, I don't want another failed relationship. And I don't want a kid to go through another failed relationship. So let's go to therapy. We love our couples therapist, Dwayne, who we now have check-ins with, but Dwayne was mentioned many times at our wedding ceremony. So I just believe that in order to be totally authentically you and show up in the world, like you have to know who you are. And I think some people try to show up authentically. They're kind of like going with what they think sounds right because they're not really 100% sure who they are or what drives them. So I continue to do work. I'm actually working with a new guy right now in terms of just diving even deeper into kind of spirituality. I'm really becoming hippy dippy out here now in LA, but it's fun. I feel like that curious part of me, instead of focusing solely on the outside world, it's been really fun to focus on the inside of myself and figure, go through all those layers and figure out who I really am.
Do you feel like all the steps that you've gone through have gotten you to where you are? Like some people learn from experiential, right? So then you've brought it all together to say, why have I done this? Or why have I? But having those experiences led you to where you are.
Yeah.
Even the tough stuff you learn from.
Oh yeah. I tell people all the time, like, I'm very grateful for a lot of even the bad things that have happened, because if they hadn't happened, I wouldn't have learned. And I do think patterns repeat themselves until you don't want them to repeat. So, it's like learning, why do I keep doing this? Oh, this is why. I don't really like that. So let's pivot, move this direction. And I think that's what, I'm learning now in my 40s too, is that you're allowed the space to do what you want to do. You don't have to listen to what everybody else is telling you to do. You don't have to care what people on social media are saying about you. You don't have to show up to things you don't want to go to. You can learn the word no, and it's okay to have boundaries. And I think that's probably been the biggest challenge, is because especially in this job, you do want to show up for people, or you make commitment, you tell somebody's story and then you want to keep in contact, but then you're exhausted and you go back to not taking care of yourself, and you're taking care of other people, or you're saying yes to events you don't really want to go to. So that's been probably my biggest challenge, is placing the boundaries. But I now see how beneficial it is to do that, because it does just lead to then things that you really want to do, or connections you really want to have.
And if you set those boundaries, don't you think people do respect them?
Yeah. That's the amazing part, right? Once you set like the first one and people are okay, you're like, wait, no one's mad at me?
Yes. Yes, that's so huge. Okay. So I want to talk about Java with Jamie.
Okay.
And I was looking at, is it a weekly? Do you do a couple a week? What is your?
So it started as a weekly series, and it started just getting, because the funny thing out here in Los Angeles is you go to call a coffee shop that you want to shoot in, and they want money, or they want, they want you to shoot at like midnight or what. So you have to maneuver that piece of it. There's usually a conversation about who we want to do. Sometimes the booking team has people that they want to highlight and do. They think it's a good opportunity. Sometimes it's people I've just found that I think are interesting, or maybe I've met somewhere. But I always want the audience to learn something from them. So it was weekly. It got to be a lot. So now it's once a month, which is great because it allows me to focus on some other things. But there is a treasure trove of Java with Jamie's out there.
Listen, and bringing this kind of full circle to what you were just talking about, and tying in, you had Victoria Garrick Brown on.
Yeah.
And Victoria was a volleyball player for USC. Our youngest, all our kids played volleyball. Our youngest daughter played for the Gophers and was a little bit ahead of Victoria, but also was really interested in watching her story, because our daughter really struggled with mental health. and has been able to come out and talk about it and go back and talk to students. But as we go into that realm of young women being able to do what you've done and start talking about it and have it be okay, that had to be a little bit of a full circle moment for you as well.
Yeah, so I had listened to her podcast as well and seen some of her work. Obviously, being here in Southern California, a USC girl, she was a name that stood out. But we went to this coffee shop, and the funny thing is, I mean, I could have made that Java with Jamie an hour long. Unfortunately, for television, it had to be like between 4 and 5 minutes.
Oh, I know.
And the funny thing, when I talk about LA being hippy dippy, my photographer who was with me that day is a life coach. So like the conversation that then happened after the cameras went off was all of the, all these spiritual, tapping into mental health, all this stuff. But yeah, I think that's one of the ones that I'm proud of because I do want people to take something away. I've interviewed comedians and, actresses and people like Victoria, social media influencers, just everyday people. And everyone has something, right? Like we talk about that a lot. Like you never know what somebody's going through, but everyone has something that they've overcome or they've learned from or they want to share with other people because it's beneficial. And so I always want to try to get that out. I recently interviewed Sheila E. for my next one. And Sheila E., is just so amazing because she says when she plays a drum, she feels the most connected to God. So she's got this whole, spirituality component in it. As a woman in her late 60s, to see just what she can do physically and how she goes about her life and how, connected she is, mind, body, and spirit. I think people will really like that one. It'll be coming out in the new year. So, but it's people like that inspire me in a different way that I hope then inspire the audience to learn something a little bit new.
And that's exactly what Katie and I, and why we do this podcast, exactly that reason.
Yeah.
Because I get inspired every time we have a guest on. There's something that they say or do or talk about that I leave the podcast really thinking about it, and it helps me to adjust or shift or whatever I need to do.
Well, and I'm usually saying like, oh my God, there's a clock running. I've got to wait, this is a podcast. We can go a little over.
You can edit too. I can help you edit. Because I know I talk a lot.
I love it. Love it. That's the part that's the best in the whole wide world. I think your resiliency, we've been talking about, we usually come up with words. We really see shifts happening in people. There seems to be a lot of shifts going on. I don't know if it's climate. You talk about the woo-woo and the hippy-dippy. I think there's some really good things that are coming down the pike. And I think your ability to just be authentically who you are is truly going to help so many people. And look, let's face it. You are living in the land of the tiny, petite person. And are you 6 feet?
No, I'm 5. That's always funny. There's a Google search. One of my top Google searches is Jamie Yuccas height. And I joke all the time because I'm 5'8", but when I wear
heels,
I wear heels. And then the other thing that happens is that like people in LA, especially actors and actors, they're very tiny people.
Tiny. That's what I'm saying.
Tiny. So I always look like this giant. So it's usually like Jamie Yuccas hair, Jamie Yuccas age, Jamie Yuccas height. Like that's my Google search.
Which is all great things, but you put this package together that is just so impressive and yet so approachable.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, you're very approachable, and you're going to be. I've just had a pleasure listening to you.
Oh, thank you.
You haven't noticed my body language, but all of a sudden I see I'm slumped. I'm just like sitting back listening, and then I think to myself, Lisa, you're doing the podcast. You got to sit up now.
Well, it is. I mean, we truly enjoy the conversation, and it's like we feel like we could bring everyone together that we've had on as guests, and this would be just a group of women that could truly change the world, which is fun.
And I got to be honest, as a news person, I think I appreciate that very, very much, and I will take that with me today. I'm concerned on I do see a shift in people who want to do better. I do get concerned with like this, the CEO of United Health, the celebration of his death on the internet. And I go, okay, well, I surround myself with a lot of people that are in this space wanting to do really good things and change the world. What is happening over here? And how do we tap into what that is? Because I understand people's anger at the healthcare system, but two things can be true at the same time. Like celebrating someone's death is not okay. So yeah, I'm hopeful that maybe, in doing these types of things, there is the possibility that then someone is listening and then they have a better conversation or they start a conversation about some of these things and we can have momentum in that space. There's a little part of me that gets very concerned of where we're at as a society.
And after saying that, there's a question I was meaning to ask you is, when you are doing a story or you're talking about the day's news, let's say, isn't it sometimes hard to separate when it's something like that or devastating, or that this is a man that lost his, that there's children that have now lost their father, and yet you have to just stay straight and do the news? Like, is that something that you sometimes really have to think about before the words come out, or does it just come out automatically because it's your job?
In doing therapy too, I have to say, I've really learned that two things can be true at the same time, right? So I can understand that people are very, very angry and that there is a brokenness to the healthcare system. And I understand that Brian Thompson was the CEO of one of the biggest insurers in this country. That's all true. There's anger and he was part of what their anger is about. It's also true that he was gunned down in Manhattan in Midtown and assassinated on the sidewalk. And I mean, my morals say that that's not okay. If I talk about it, it came up this morning where I said, I am concerned where we just are so open about talking about our hatred in a way that we're okay that this man died. I'm not okay that the man died, but I'm okay having the conversation about the healthcare system and insurance and those types of things. And I think it's true of politics too. I've lived in Florida and Minnesota and New York and now California. I have friends who run the spectrum of ideas and political parties, and some have switched and some haven't. And, it's one of those things I try very hard to just say to myself, what are my values and morals? And put that in a box, but then listen and go, okay. And you can usually, if it's like the mirroring in therapy that you do sometimes with people. If you can mirror someone and validate them, I think we'd have more productive conversations. I don't have to agree with you, but I do think we have to validate each other's experience and ideas. So I try to stay in that space of, okay, I get that. And what about this? And just kind of, having more of a conversation about it and asking questions and being curious than being judgmental, because
trying to understand how people get to the point
there
that they're
yes.
at, to be able to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not trying to change your mind, but I am trying to, maybe as you've talked about, misinformation is a huge problem.
Well, and my husband's background is science. He's a scientist. So earlier I said, that was not my realm. It's his realm. And so he's somebody that looks at data and looks at numbers and looks at all that stuff. And, it's sometimes people want to even misinterpret that, and it's like, but this is the data. Well, if someone, I always go back to the economy with that, because I feel like even in this election, it's what came up is that, yeah, the data all looks good, but people's feelings are that it's really bad. So how do you then get people to bridge where the data says we are and how people are feeling? I look at, even when we talk about gender and males and loneliness and where men are at right now, I think, men, if you look at the data, still get paid more than women. There's more CEOs who are male than female. The data says that they're in a much better position. And if you're a white man, the data shows you are in a much better position than everybody else. However, that part of the population is really feeling like attacked and that they're not. So I'm trying to figure out now, how do we start having conversations that bridge that together of, okay, I can validate your feelings, where is that coming from, and trying to get to the root of that when the data says something completely different, because otherwise it is just misinformation where people's feelings lead all conversations of, well, I feel that this is true, or I feel that this is what's happening. And so now the internet has made it that that opinion is fully true, when in actuality, it's not. So how do we come back to bridging that? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but maybe you guys can figure it out on future podcasts.
This is compelling conversation at the end of the podcast where I guess if there's anyone who's going to lead us through this, you are poised for the job, looking at your background and what you've been able to do so far. I'm excited that you can find a path to those discussions.
Thank you, because I think journalism also has a ways to go. We've become a business that it's more lucrative to be very left or very right. And I think it's the media's job to also come back to the center. That conversation isn't that popular in a lot of newsrooms. So I guess we'll see.
We'll see. That'll take a lot of strength and fortitude and patience and discernment.
And hopefully you can continue to lead the way, because we need more people like you.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh. I didn't know I was going to get a free therapy session today too.
Well, we do it for each other, right? We do it for each other. And that's really what it's all. I joked at the beginning on our intro that if a person looked at the body of work on our podcast and they just picked one out to listen to, hopefully it would be kind of like that church experience that you go to when pastor says something that you're supposed to hear, right?
Right.
Because our message, particularly to women, is you are your best self, and the grace and care that we give our best selves to continue to live in the world and find our strength to move forward with all of the bad things that are going on. So that's what we try to do for each other.
Well, thank you both. And thank you for having me on.
Oh my gosh, yes. Listen, before we go, we want to talk about your nonprofit. And you picked SNNLA.org, which is something I had never heard of. I'm assuming there's an SNN and LA, so Special Needs Network.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So my friend Aviva Martin, who people may see on CNN and other places, her background is law. She's a lawyer, focuses on civil rights and that type of thing. She and I have become very good friends here in Los Angeles, and her son has autism. And Riva, when her son was diagnosed, she's African American, and her son was diagnosed, and there was no resources. They didn't know anything about autism. Their family had never been diagnosed. The doctors didn't seem to have a lot of answers in navigating the system. She realized, as a woman of color with resources, how many women of color who didn't have resources were getting even less information than she was. So she ended up starting this organization that has continued to grow over the years, and now has a beautiful facility, and has done things like started a food truck in an area that's really a food desert. And some of these kids that go through the program are now working in the food truck, and just trying to get kids with special needs into their highest functioning, to be able to go out and build their confidence and do different jobs, and have their families feel really supported and have the latest information and guidance as to how they can care for their children. And I've just been very touched by her work. And she's one of those powerhouse women too. I figured with this podcast, she's somebody that inspires me. So I wanted to bring it back to someone like her, who's just, had a personal, in some ways, as she said, there was grief around it. It was somewhat of a family tragedy when it first started, and now it's become a blessing, and she's been able to help so many other people. So I always attend her fundraisers and thought this would be a fun charity to participate in if people want to.
Oh, fantastic. So it's SNNLA.org, Autism Underserved Communities for Marginalized People. What a really wonderful opportunity to get involved with something special that touches a lot of people.
Yes.
A lot of people. Thank you. Jamie, if people want to find you and reach out, I know you're on social media, but give us a quick rundown.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, the great thing about the last name Yuccas, because there's not a lot of awesome things about it, because it's kind of a funny spelling and it's a Y, so you're always at the end of the line in elementary school. But my name, it's JamieYuccas, and you can find me at Jamie Yuccas on Instagram, at Jamie Yuccas on Twitter, Jamie Yuccas on Facebook. So any social media. And I'm happy to interact or answer questions or, anything. I love hearing from people. So
You're terrific.
You are,
And
you are really, you're very special.
oh, thank you.
Agreed. Thanks, Jamie.
There's no ego.
I think if I died tomorrow, I'd be happy with this last podcast that we just did. I'm just gonna say.
Well, I would be really sad if you died tomorrow.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't want to die tomorrow, but truly, she's just amazing.
Yeah, she's really, yes, she is. And she has no ego and she's out to help others. And it was an absolute pleasure to have her on.
It truly was. And, I didn't say it, and I'm sure he's not going to listen, but I got to thank Wayne Kostrowski for introducing me to Jamie. Jamie was the MC for Sue Zellickson's 90th birthday party.
Oh, okay.
And that's where I met Jamie. And I stood eye to eye with her. And so she clearly had heels on because with whatever shoe I put on, I'm a good 6 feet. But just really, truly, her warm, welcoming personality was there. But she's really figured out, well, I don't even know if she's figured, I think she's always known just exactly who she is. And that's really enjoyable. I think if I were, the one question we missed asking her was if she ever suffers from imposter syndrome. And I bet she'd say yes. But
yeah, sure she has. But like she said, she's had a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
And, it's really helped her.
It really has, to be able to navigate through. And I think if anything, for people who are questioning whether they should do therapy or not, to be able to look at someone like Jamie and say, and look at how easily she now navigates through and is able to talk about the issues that have arisen in her life that she can overcome and move forward.
Yeah. The one question that I had in my notes, Katie, that I didn't ask, because I have this terrible fear of flying, is like she's on planes all the time. And, is she mind flying? Does it bother her? But we didn't ask.
We did not ask. Maybe she'll let us know after she listens through this long ass podcast that we just did. And we can see each other, but we only take the recording. And Lisa was yawning just a few minutes ago.
No, that was like a yawn of relaxation.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time.
I mean, when have you known me in a podcast to go like I'm like slumping in my chair and I'm just sitting back listening? I wasn't tired. I was just like relaxing. I don't relax during a podcast.
You don't generally relax, period. So, so I'm happy you got there. But hey, Lisa, happy holidays. Thank you for being my partner in this whatever crazy ride we're on. It's been incredible. And another year is ticking by. And I wish you just the best as we come into 2025. Thank you for every bit of you. I love you beyond.
I feel the same way about you. You know that. You are the best. And we are a very good team.
We are. And really, for those of you listening, we want to thank you. If you want any more information on us, if you aren't sick of us, please go to theviewinyourmirror.com and reach out. We love questions. We love comments. We love hearing from you. The texts that we get are, really, they warm our heart. They really do. And they keep us going. And that's what it's all about, because we hope that we can help you to recognize that you are the best you. And the view in your mirror should reflect that. Until next time.